I call to order the Tuesday, January 24th, 2023, Richland 2, School District 2, regular board meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Porter.
I move to approve the agenda for the January 24th, 2023 regular board meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Porter and seconded by Mrs. Nash. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Please post the motion. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 3, executive session. Do I have a motion for the board to convene an executive session?
Madam Chair?
Is that Ms. Washington?
Yes.
Ms. Washington.
I move that we convene an executive session for the purpose of discussing interim superintendent compensation and contract, student admission requests into the district's adult ed program, student appeals, breach of contracts, and employment recommendations and certified releases.
Thank you, Mrs. Washington. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Mrs. McFadden to convene an executive session. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Washington, please check your motion.
Is correct.
Thank you. Board members, please vote. And the motion carries. There are 7 yes and 0 no. We will adjourn into executive session. Do I have a motion to come out of executive session?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trapp.
I move that executive session ended at 6:11 and the board reconvene in public session.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mr. Nash and seconded, or excuse me, by Mr. Trapp and seconded by Mrs. Nash. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Please post the motion. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Moving on to item 4.0, the inspirational moment. I am pleased to introduce to you today the learners and leaders from Lonnie B. Nelson.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Ms. Gregory. I am Dr. Twanisha Garner, proud principal at Lonnie B. Nelson Elementary School. I am so excited to present leaders from our great school who will demonstrate how we act in service to our community. Our mission statement is learning to lead and leading to learn betters myself, home, school, and world. Tonight, our students will show what that looks like, sounds like, and feels like within the Lonnie B. Nelson community. Without further ado, I present to you our Lonnie B. Nelson leaders.
Good evening, and thank you for having the learners and leaders of Lonnie B. Nelson to give tonight an inspirational moment and to close up the school boards of Appreciation Month.
As students in Richmond 2, we recognize the service that you pour into us, our teachers, and the families of our great district. We are grateful for your commitment to serving as we develop the character, community, learning, and joy of Richmond School District 2 together.
Thank you, sir, our Richland 2 community. At Lonnie B. Nelson, we focus on service learning to grow as learners and leaders.
Service learning is a teaching and learning process that combines our South Carolina state standards to community service and project-based problem solving.
Our mission at Lonnie B. Nelson is learning to lead, leading to learn, betters myself, home, school, and world. Tonight we would like to share with you how our service learning experiences develop us as leaders for today to make an even greater impact in the future.
A recent project that we led was called A Handful of Candy for Our Heroes. After learning about the work and efforts service members and veterans have given to our country during Veterans Week, our school wanted to find a way to give back. We knew that students typically get way more candy than they truly need at the end of October. So we asked our students to be willing to share any extra candy they had. Our service learning team of students researched where we could donate candy as a treat to our local service members. Each day, students collected candy from classes and graphed the totals. Students were able to analyze the graph as they passed it daily in the hallway, which stirred up some friendly competition among all grade levels. All in all, we collected 9,948 pieces of candy. Then we got to work making phone calls to local businesses to make our delivery.
Students made goodie bags for soldiers at Fort Jackson. We provided candy to the USO station in the airport for traveling service members, and we also reached out to local recruitment centers to show our gratitude for their service. Students were able to apply addition and subtraction strategies and analyze data as we grabbed our candy collections, giving up something that we as kids truly love, candy, was just a small service for the greatest sacrifice our service members and veterans have given to us.
This year we hosted an event called Service Saturday. As members of our Lonnie B. Nelson family, our building is our home. We invited our school community to join in as we physically poured into our buildings and grounds. Students and parents gathered to touch up paint, clean windows and mirrors, clear weeds out of beds, pick up any trash, and pressure wash furniture. It truly was an act of love to serve our school, even on a Saturday.
Each year, our ACE Magnet program hosts Market Day. This simulation event serves our community where consumers are able to shop the local business that our ACE classes have designed. We began by collecting ideas for products we'd like to make and sell. We surveyed our ACE classes to see what their interest would be in buying the products. After we narrowed down our products and determined how much we should charge, after we narrowed down our products and completed a cost analysis to see how much it would cost to make our products and determine how much we should charge, you may have seen us using measurement scales as we poured ingredients to make hot chocolate reindeer or slime. The night of Market Day is the most fun learning event. Students opened their class business for community members to shop the products they made. We practiced making change for customers as transactions were made. Market Day is something you have to see. After the hustle and bustle was over, we gathered our earnings and determined our profit. This means we had to subtract the cost it took to make the product with our calculated profit. Each class determined how they would like to spend, save, and share their money. This year, my class has decided to spend our money on tissue boxes, flexible seating, and a new pencil sharpener. Save our money for the end of the year class celebration, and we will share a portion of our profit to Palmetto Lifeline.
As you see, Lonnie B learners and leaders are serving our home, school, and world. Just as you serve our Lonnie B Richland 2 community. Our excellent school is a great place to be.
Thank you. Thank you for your service to our Richland 2 family and for the opportunity to share how we build character through learning and community service, and most of all, bring joy to the hive of Lonnie B. Nelson.
We thank you so much for your service to our community. We appreciate the work that you do. Thank you.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to Dr. Gardner and the learners and leaders at Lonnie B. Nelson, thank you so much for inspiring us tonight. And I will say that you truly inspired me. I did come to your market day, and the most amazing thing was at 6:45, with 15 minutes left, I heard, okay, kids, think about supply and demand now. So great job. Thank you again for coming. Moving on to item 5, board recognitions. Tonight, it's my pleasure to recognize one of our own sitting up here, the South Carolina Boards Association Boardsmanship Award. As board members, we are encouraged to go and develop our knowledge about governance and running school boards and districts. And tonight, I am honored to award my colleague LaShonda McFadden with her level 2 certificate. Please, a round of applause for Mrs. McFadden. Item 5.2, review and signing of the South Carolina School Boards Association ethical principles. Dr. Scott.
Thank you, Mrs. Agostini. The month of January marks the annual observance of School Board Recognition Month, a time to salute the work of more than 600 board members serving South Carolina public schools, especially to my colleagues, Richland School District 2 board members. And before I go any further, thank you to the students and the staff for our delicious dinner today. It was awesome. Schools and districts around the state participate in School Board Recognition Month to honor the contributions and services of school board trustees. The theme this year is School Boards Stand Up for South Carolina Public Schools. It recognizes the important role school boards play in promoting and advocating for equitable and quality public education. We are elected to be a fair voice for all faculty, staff, and students, and to ensure the success of all schools, students, finances, and policies. Along with school board recognition, school board members in every school district hold an official signing of the ethical principles publicly saying that we, and I will say that again, that we will uphold these effective governance principles, and we pledge to improve public education in the community throughout the coming year and beyond. To show collaboration and unity amongst our school board, we have decided as a team that we will share the reading of the ethical principles as well as sign the poster. I will begin. And this is the poster. It states, as members of the school board, we pledge our efforts to improve public education in our community, and we will solemnly try to, first, represent the interests of the entire district when making decisions and to rely on available facts and on our judgment rather than individuals or special interest groups. Understand, the proper role of the board is to set policies governing the district and to hire the chief administrative officer to carry out these policies. With that, I will sign and I will pass it along to my colleague.
Encourage an open exchange of ideas by all board members during the decision-making process. Seek regular communications between the board and students, staff, and all segments of the community. And I'm going to sign.
Attend all board meetings to study issues facing the board and to enact policies and official actions only after full discussion at such meetings. Work with other board members in a conscientious and courteous manner befitting the public trust placed in the position of school board trustee.
Communicate concerns and the public reaction to board policies and school programs to the superintendent and other board members in a professional manner. Support employment of the persons best qualified for staff positions and to ensure a regular and impartial evaluation of all staff.
Avoid conflicts of interest and refrain from using my board position for a personal or partisan gain. Encourage recognition of achievements of students and staff and the involvement of community residents.
Support legislation and funding which will improve the educational opportunities and environment for students and staff. Take no individual actions which would compromise the integrity of the board or administration, and to respect the confidentiality of information that is privileged under the Freedom of Information Act.
To study current educational issues and to participate in training programs such as those offered through the South Carolina School Board Association and the National School Boards Association, and make our district's educational setting the best possible to encourage all students to achieve and to love learning.
Board members, let's please move up front so we can get a photo with our commitment for the ethical principles. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Scott, and thank you, board members. Item 6.0, consent agenda. Is there a motion for the consent agenda?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Porter.
I move to approve the consent agenda for the January, is that supposed to be January 24th?
January 24th.
Okay. I move to approve the consent agenda for the January 24th, 2023 regular board meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion has been made by Mrs. Porter and seconded by Mrs. Nash. Is there any discussion? And there is no discussion. And the motion is correct. Board members, please vote. And the motion is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 7, public participation. We have 2 participants this evening. Our first speaker will be Rochelle Tomlin.
Good evening. My name is Rochelle Tomlin, and my son Donald Tomlin is a student athlete at Ridgeview High School. As many of you are aware, back in the fall, Richland District 2 received a complaint filed against my son that we had not made a bona fide change of address upon moving into the district. I am here to set the record straight because the district did an incompetent investigation and never gave us an opportunity to discuss the issues at hand before turning their evidence into the South Carolina High School League. They didn't even take the time to say, hey, this is what we found, and given us an opportunity to make it right. Instead, on the afternoon of Wednesday, October 26, the district sent an email to the league and copied Dr. Mack, principal at Ridgeview High School. In a little over 24 hours, we gathered all the evidence and emailed the district and the league, but nobody would listen. But these are the facts. My son and I did move into the district. We do live in an apartment at 4500 Hartscrabble Road. I did provide my lease agreements, electric bills, copies of all medical bills, and all copies of checks of all paid bills. I did provide a lease of the agreement of our old residence, making it impossible that we would still be living there, along with check payments. We were not given due process. The investigation was poor. The district turned in an investigation based off a witness's assertion that he did or did not see my vehicle at our apartment complex parking lot over a period of 33 days between September 16th and October 18th, of which this witness came by 11 times. So 11 times over 33 days, of which 3 out of the 11 times were on Friday nights. Example, it states, Friday, September 16, 2022, 7 p.m., cars not seen. Of course, cars are not seen. I am always and was always attending my son's football games on a Friday night. Also noted on the investigation, bullet point number 4 states, there is no garage located at 4500 Hartscrabble apartment complex. Correction, on October 14th, AJ took photos of garages in the backside of the complex. So investigation started on September 16th. So 29 days into the 33 days of the investigation, the witness says there are garages. Well, the first thing when you turn into our apartment complex, you see the garages. One cannot miss the garages. Again, the facts submitted were grossly inaccurate, and decisions were made on inaccurate data. My son has loved being at Ridgeview. We have loved being a part of the Richland District 2 community. This is about my son's well-being. He has 4 months left of his senior year, and he has always been a student athlete and wants to participate in spring sports, which
Mrs.
tryouts
Tomlin,
are...
and I apologize. You're over 3 minutes. I didn't state that at the very beginning, so if you could briefly wrap it up, we'd appreciate that, okay?
Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
All right, thank you.
My son would like to participate in spring sports, which tryouts are next Monday, January 30th for golf, track, and field. He thrives on being a part of something and competing with other student athletes, and I can guarantee you he's a lot better football player than runner or golfer. I asked the district to please fix and correct its recommendations to the league that my son has met all the requirements to be a student athlete, and to please restore my son's eligibility so he can participate in spring sports these last 4 months of his high school career. I thank you for your time and your service to the Richland District 2.
Thank you, Mrs. Tomlin.
Sorry.
And my apologies to the public. Generally, I have a script. Our secretary was sick tonight, and I thought I could get away without having the script, but that was the vital part that I missed in all of this. So I apologize. The public participation, it's a 3-minute time limit, and not to recognize any employees or students in the district. Thank you. Our next speaker is going to be Burnett Gallman.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'd like to believe that we're all here because we wish to ensure that all our children get a quality education. Unfortunately, recent events run counter to that desire. The IG report was highly critical of this board, which it called dysfunctional. It was much more critical of the board than it was of the former superintendent. Since the resignation was deemed the honorable thing for him to do, then perhaps those remaining board members who were part of that dysfunctional board should consider resigning. This board has, in my opinion, decisively elected to sacrifice quality. We lost a highly respected, nationally recognized administrator for God knows what reason. During his tenure, the former superintendent demonstrated excellence, caring, accountability, and unbelievable grace amidst unconscionable attacks on his integrity. Also in this room, he demonstrated the will to defend and protect his family from cunning provocateurs, a quality I would imagine that most wives would expect and appreciate. We need a superintendent who looks like and can relate to the students in Richland too, 72% of which are black and brown. Although we realize that all skin folk ain't kinfolk. We need someone strong enough to push back on the loud anti-truth fanatics and others with agendas that don't serve our students. We have seen how a small but loudly vocal group can wield undue influence. There will be henceforth another equally loud group that will champion truth, fairness, and accountability. They will hold a two-way mirror in front of this board. Richland too needs a capable, dedicated administrator and should not be micromanaged by elected officials with frequently petty political interests. All members of our district deserve representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallman. Item 8, voting on executive session items. 8.1, student admission request into the district adult education program. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Porter.
I move to approve the student admission request into the district's adult education program for students 1 through 3.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion has been made by Mrs. Porter and seconded by Dr. Scott. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Is the motion correct, Mrs. Porter?
It is correct.
All right, board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 8.2, student appeals. Before we take a motion, would any board member like this separated, or can we do a combined motion? Okay. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Nash.
I move to grant the student appeal hearing for student number 1.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion has been made by Mrs. Nash and seconded by Dr. Scott to grant an appeal hearing for student number 1. Is there any discussion?
Agostini, who seconded the motion?
Dr. Scott seconded the motion. The motion was made by Mrs. Nash. Is the motion correct?
There is the word appeal.
Yeah, I move to grant an appeal hearing for student number 1.
In
That's
person.
correct.
It should say, I move to grant an appeal in person.
An in-person hearing.
Yes. I'm sorry. I don't know if it matters, but there's a capital T on 2.
Board members, please vote. And the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Mrs. Nash.
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Nash.
I move to deny student appeal hearing for students number 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Nash and seconded by Dr. Scott to deny appeals for students 2, 3, 4, and 5. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Mrs. Nash, is the motion correct, which is posted?
So if it has to be correct, yeah, that's right. Yes,
Okay.
correct.
All right, the motion is correct. Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. 8.3, breach of contracts. Excuse me? Okay, could you call the board vote back? I read it as 7. Was it 7 or 6? Excuse me. So the vote, pardon me, the vote was 6 yes, 1 no. I'm sorry, I didn't see that in between. I'll put my glasses on for the next one. So the motion does carry. 6 yes, 1 no. Thank you, board members. Item 8.3, breach of contracts. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Washington.
I move that we direct the administration to make a formal complaint to the State Board of Education regarding employee number 1 who breached their contract with the district.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Dr. Scott. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Dr. Scott seconded the motion.
That's correct.
Board members, please vote. Mrs. Washington, is that correct?
I tapped yes.
I'm sorry?
That's not correct. That's not what I selected.
Okay, board members, please revote. So the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Mrs. Washington.
I move that we direct the administration to make a formal complaint to the State Board of Education regarding employee number 2 who breached their contract with the district.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Dr. Scott. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion? Is the motion correct, Mrs. Washington?
That's correct.
Board members, please vote. And the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Mrs. Washington.
I move that we direct administration not to make a formal complaint regarding the breach of contract for employee number 3.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Dr. Scott. Is there any discussion? Is the motion correct?
That's correct.
Board members, please vote. And the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Mrs. Washington.
I move that we direct administration not to make a formal complaint regarding breach of contract for employee number 4.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Mrs. McFadden. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Washington, is the motion correct?
That's correct.
Board members, please vote.
Mrs. Agostini,
Yes.
I'm sorry. There is something that needs to be corrected in the motion.
Okay, please share with us.
it should say, I move that we direct administration to not make a formal complaint regarding breach of contract for employee number 4.
Ms. Washington, will you restate your motion?
Yes. I move that we direct administration not to make a formal complaint regarding breach of contract for employee number 4.
I believe that Ms. Washington's vote is not correct and that we may need to revote on this. Is that, the motion is correct up there? And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Mrs. Washington.
I move that we direct administration not to make a formal complaint regarding breach of contract for employee number 5.
Second. The motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Mrs. McFadden. Is there any discussion? And there is no discussion. Mrs. Washington, can you please confirm the motion is correct?
Correct.
Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 8.4, employment recommendations and certified releases. Board, may I have a motion, please?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden.
I move to approve the employment recommendations and certified releases.
Is there a second?
I second.
The motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Mrs. Porter. Board, is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Mrs. McFadden, is the motion correct? Board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 9, unfinished business, no action required. 9.1, revision policy BEDB, board agenda. Mrs. Gregory.
At this time, Dr. Marshall Franklin, our deputy superintendent, is coming to the podium.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. Madam Chair, members of the board, at the January 10th meeting, the board discussed policy BEDB, board agenda, and voted to alter the verbiage in paragraph 1 as notated on the draft proposal. District administration recommends a few changes to paragraph 2 as well. The first recommended change is to remove board members from paragraph 2, as the procedure for board members is specified in the new verbiage that will be inserted in paragraph 1. And the second recommendation is to change the minimum number of days by which a staff member or member of the public is expected to submit an agenda item request from 3 business days to 4 business days, making it consistent with that of the board member requirement of 4 business days. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Franklin. Board members, this is the first reading of this policy. We will bring it up for a second reading after administration made the changes. Board members, is there any discussion?
Madam Chair?
Mrs. Nash?
I would like to go ahead and make a motion, if we can, to adopt this change. Are we, okay.
Well, this
Or
is
can
just,
I move
this
to
is for
the-
just discussion
Okay.
purposes.
So can, there is one thing that I did want to, am I recognized first?
Yes,
Sorry.
you're recognized, Mrs. Nash.
So there is one change that, was discussed, and we are thinking about wanting to change where it says, the board chair in cooperation with the superintendent and/or vice chair, secretary, or rotating board member in case any of those people are out.
You know, and board members, does anybody have anything to say about that? I'm fine with it. My only concern is we've got to be very mindful that we can't have more than 3 board members in the room, or that's a quorum.
I agree with it because it said if those board members, the board chair or secretary is not available. So I think that's great. Give another board member an opportunity.
I would like to send that to be looked at by our superintendent to review. And give us a recommendation.
Do you have any opinion or comment on that?
I think I'm fine with the 3, as long as we have no more than.
As long as we have no more than 3. So, Mrs. Nash, would you like to, now would be the time to make an amendment?
Yes.
Make a motion to amend what we have before us?
I would like to move to amend the first, the part that we struck out to read, the board chair in cooperation with the superintendent and/or vice chair, secretary, or in their absence, rotating board member will prepare the agenda for all meetings. All board members will provide subject matters. Oh, okay, you got that part. Okay, just that part. Thank you.
Okay, I've made note of what you said.
You get it?
I did.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Could you repeat that motion, because I'm concerned or confused?
Okay. I move that we amend the portion that has where we've struck out the 2 paragraphs and inserted the board chair in cooperation with the superintendent and/or vice chair or secretary, or in their absence, rotating board member will prepare the agenda for all meetings.
I'm sorry, are you at the first paragraph or are you in the second paragraph?
That is the first paragraph.
So the very first part, we're revising it completely again.
If you look, it's only one line. It's only one line.
I'm sorry, where, are we in the middle of the paragraph? I started looking at the first. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? There's no discussion? We didn't vote. Oh. I was waiting for forgive me, I was waiting for a motion to pop up, so
No.
there's going to be nothing to pop up, then I'm sorry, all those in favor, raise your hand.
We're not voting. We just need to move to the next policy.
No,
She's
actually, well, no, we're voting to amend this policy, so there has to, this is the first reading, she's asking to change it. So then we do have to
So we're
vote
amending.
to amend the policy, because this is the first reading, so that it'll come back to us. Last time it was just a draft. This time, if we are amending the policy, we have to vote to amend the policy. Okay, so all those in favor, please raise your hand. Please raise your right hand. So there are 6 yes, all those opposed, 1 no. The motion carries. Is there any additional discussion regarding policy BEDB? All right, moving on. Revision of policy BEDN, board members' use of district-owned portable devices.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mrs. Oh, we'll refer to Mrs. Gregory first.
Yes, and Dr. Franklin again will lead us off.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. Madam Chair, members of the board, also at the January 10th meeting, the board discussed policy BEDN, board members' use of district-owned portable devices, and voted to alter the verbiage in paragraph 1 as notated on the draft proposal. District administration recommends that the board does not specify a particular brand of device in policy and use the word tablet instead of iPad. So for example, our Board Docs currently is compatible with Apple products, so it's fine. But should Board Docs, the company, do an update or make some changes to their programming and is no longer compatible, by having iPad in the policy, it restricts us to making any purchases of a different product until the policy is changed. Additionally, district administration suggests replacing the word offered with the word provided, as recommended in the State Inspector General's report concerning this matter. The verbiage appearing in blue at the bottom of the policy proposal reflects both of district administration's recommendations.
Thank you, Dr. Franklin. Board members, any discussion? There's no discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Franklin. Moving on, new business action requested. Cell phone purchase for board members. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. Washington.
in light of our IG committee having a meeting on last week, We discussed the policy and would like to go ahead and make a motion that the board order cell phones are ordered for board members to conduct official board communication, especially for email and text, and will be returned at the end of their term.
Is there a second?
Second.
A motion has been made by Mrs. Washington and seconded by Dr. Scott. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trapp.
I just have a question, I guess. On the cell phones, are we going to decide what operating system will be provided? You know, I'm not sure if we're going to get that detailed or not. Do we have any idea what the administration has in mind?
No, we will leave that up to administration to determine what the best use of cell phones will be for us.
Okay.
Any other discussion? And I'll just comment briefly for the public, for those and most, that are paying attention right now with the IG report, it was asked for us to, it was recommended that the district provide us cell phones. And when I've talked to a few people in the community, they've, not completely understood until we explained. When we went through the IG process, we were all asked to hand over our personnel cell phones. And I believe all board members did without hesitation. But there could be the opportunity where we could refuse and say no. So with this, we cannot say no when it's district property, government property. We are required, and you want us to have these cell phones so that we do not get board emails, board text messages, or phone calls on our cell phones. You will have access to any and all information should you wish and FOIA it. Any further discussion?
Yes. I move that cell phones be ordered for board members to conduct official board communication, especially email and text, and will be returned at the end of their term of office.
Mrs. Washington, is the motion correct?
Official board communications, especially email and text.
Is the motion correct? Please read it one more time.
What's up there is correct.
Okay. Board members, please vote. And the motion is, or the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. Item 11, new business, no action requested. 11.1, HR staffing update. Mrs. Gregory.
Yes, at this time, Mrs. Shawn Williams, who is our Senior Chief Human Resources Officer, will give an HR staffing update.
Thank you, Ms. Gregory. Good evening, Madam Chair, Board. And I want to first say thank you to our staff, our teachers who do the work every day, our administrators. I just want to say thank you, our bus drivers. Thank you so much for being a part of this great staff, and thank you to those who are stepping in tonight to fill in. So I do want to say thank you all for that as well. So welcome to Richland 2 Human Resources District Staffing Presentation. A presentation will provide you with a snapshot of historical and current information regarding staffing. As of January 4th, 2023, our district employed 3,673 full-time staff members, with 2,318 of those being certified staff. We also employ 27 part-time staff members. So we look at our average age. Our average age is 45, with our average years of experience being 7. Half of the Richland 2 teaching staff are in 2 experience categories. The dark green section includes teachers who have no more than 5 years experience, and the orange section represents our veteran teachers with 20 years or more experience. This is also represented here with the from 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and 16 to 20 years. So we're going to look at total certified staff by race and gender. These charts show a breakdown of certified staff by race and gender. The overall staff race shows that there are 59 Asians, 12 biracials, 934 African American or Black, 68 Hispanic, 5 Indian, 3 Pacific Islanders, and 1,163 white or Caucasian certified staff members. As we shift into our classified staff members, these charts here show that we employ 674 African American or Black and 351 white or Caucasian employees out of 1,190 classified staff members. As we look at our professional staff, those include various departments such as IT, our social workers, those who are in professional categories that are not certified, shows that there are more women in this category, professional staff category, and more white or Caucasian employees. So we're going to look at our 5-year data from the South Carolina teacher departures and graduates from SARA. And it shows here that in green, teachers from the previous school year who did not return to teaching positions in the same district. You can see that number has constantly increased, where the number of graduates of a South Carolina bachelor's or master's level initial teacher preparation program has decreased. So let's emphasize 2021 to 2022, where teachers who did not return to the teaching position in the same district was 6,927, where there were only 2,123 graduates of a South Carolina bachelor's or master's level initial teacher preparation program. So we're going to look at our Richland 2 certified retention rate over the last number of years, starting with 2015. And you can see where the district was trending at around 90% on average, and in 21-22, we are at 80%. So we know that teachers leave for a variety of reasons. So teacher departure data shows that a small percentage of teachers resign for personal health reasons. The largest number of resignations was noted in retirements and personal reasons that were family related. Over the last 3 years, 13.5% of our teachers left Richland 2 to work in other districts in South Carolina. Many of our veteran teachers do have the option to retire as well. So we're going to look at our certified employees who retired by the year. As you all are aware, in 17-18 was one of our higher years due to the end of Terry. However, Terry is no longer a part of the South Carolina retirement system. And in 21-22, there was an uptick in retirements, and this would have came after the COVID year, where we had 65 individuals who were certified who retired. So newly hired teachers, we are trending at over 320 is the average number of teachers that we hire over the last 3 years. You can see here the data is provided for the last school year. For the 21-22 school year, we hired 333 teachers. So Premier 100, do want to give you an update on that. That is an initiative where the district is to recruit and retain 100 males of color. And as you can see, in the first year, we hired 21. In 21-22, 34. And in 22-23, 36. We've retained 77 of the 91. So where are we now? Where are our current vacancies? Because we do have a number of vacancies. Here, very similar to any other district in the nation and here in South Carolina. In 22-23, our current vacancies as of right now for this school year is 154. We sent out letters of intent in December. We do have 70 people who have indicated that they will not be returning in the 2023-2024 school year who have already completed their separation forms. So to total, as of right now, our focus is on replacing 224 positions. So what are our recruitment strategies here? And I do want to thank Dr. Lovett, who's in the room. If you guys are familiar, Dr. Lovett is a veteran Richland 2 employee who's spent over 30 years in the district, who leads our talent acquisition team. It relies on cross-department and district-wide collaboration to implement successful recruiting strategies. We do have some focus areas, of course, our bus drivers, elementary, middle-level education, math, special education, special education, science, and substitutes. So what did we do over the fall? Dr. Lovin and her team have attended a number of recruitment fairs. You can see here the information is provided. Just a quick highlight, in October, they went to Anderson College. We also hosted our Premier 100 Summit, where South Carolina State and Columbia College Misters came to visit us as well. In November, we hosted our Get on the Bus. December, we had our holiday open house and our walk-in Wednesdays. So in January, February, and March, we are busy as well, where last week we were at Winthrop University, Newberry College, and Scadsby. And in February, we'll be attending USC, Claflin, Francis Marion, and in March, we will be at the South Carolina Middle Level Conference. In Georgia Southern, we'll attend some virtual events that are available, and also the Sarah Recruitment Fair is moving from in-person to a virtual fair as well. So we will also, over the last year, since the beginning of the school year, we've hosted a number of events in 2022. You can see that information provided here. So what are we doing in the spring of 2023? We just had our January 7th career fair. We also have our February career fair for operations and virtual fairs on February the 8th. And then March career fair, we'll have a virtual one. And we also will have in-person events because we are traveling as well. In April, you can see the dates of our in-person and virtual. Also in May, June, and July. So I want to go back to some of our retention highlights. So we have mentors for first-year teachers, which is such a significant part of what we do. Having mentors and able to offer professional development. We also have our APEC program, and that is our partnership with Columbia College for our current teacher assistants to be able to become teachers here in the district. We have our national board stipend. We also, over the last few years, the board has granted a $1,500 bonus allowing employees to take home $1,000. Some additional retention highlights that we have here, a variety of strategies. Here we provide regular information and guidance for our employees on available benefits, including voluntary participation in a wide variety of plans, such as cancer insurance, disability insurance, and even pet insurance. We also added hospital stay pay and accident insurance. We're delighted for our partnership that we have with H&R Block and our International Teacher Social. One of my favorite things to do each month is to go to a rookie teacher's classroom. Just the smiles on their faces and the excitement of what they do. If you had a chance to follow us on Twitter, follow the district on Twitter, and see the live or the recording, and just see how they're shocked and excited that someone recognizes them. We just want to highlight our rookie teachers of the block from last year who were our finalists. Ms. Phillips, who's at Longleaf, was a finalist. Also Ms. Johnson, who's at Rice Creek Elementary, who was a finalist as well. And also highlight our rookie teacher of the year, Xavier Spann, who's a special education teacher at Muller Road. These individuals are now in their second year teaching, and we're just delighted to continue that program for Rookie Teachers of the Block. And this, at this point, concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Board members, questions?
Madam Chair?
We're going to start with Mrs. Washington if she has questions, simply because she asked to have us added to the agenda, and then we'll go from there.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your presentation. So I love this Rookie Teacher of the Block program that we have for teachers, and it is so awesome and a dynamic way to celebrate teachers. But I would like to know, what partnerships do we have in place to have the same type of recognition for our bus drivers, our secretaries, and any other classified staff?
I know that individuals are recognized at their schools. And also for bus drivers, Mr. Anderson does recognize our bus drivers. They also receive incentives as well. And our schools also have those programs individually. But again, the Rookie Teacher of the Block is a district initiative. So that is what we're doing currently. Ms. Gregory, anything you would like to add?
I think you've covered it, but the Rookie Teacher of the Year has been very well received, and we appreciate the business partnership and the community partnership for that.
Thank you. And I guess it's not so much a concern, but if we have a district initiative for teachers, is there some way that we can continue to show and display the same thing for our classified employees as well? I think that's very important, and I know that they do it at the school level. As I've worked at a school level, and school level also has their, sometimes they have their own teacher recognition programs outside of the district. But I just want to make sure that we are not forgetting about our classified employees, and I want to make sure that it's not something that we just leave up to the department, but that it's something that we do district-wide, just like we do for teachers. So that's one of my questions. So 50% of our teachers are leaving for personal reasons. And I want to know, how are we fostering environments that actually say that we're advocating for our teachers in terms of mental health? Is there support that is provided from the district level to the school level for our teachers and our employees?
We do offer EAP, so if there is an issue, the Employee Assistance Program is available. It is information that is shared at our schools, shared with our staff, so they are available to use that. Ms. Gregory, I will defer to you any additional information.
We have called on our counselors, our interventionists, members of our LSS team to also work with our teachers, and we've done that more in the last couple of years. I know that our behavior interventionist even, I was recently at a middle school principal meeting, and they met with the principals and actually gave them some strategies. So they've been doing a lot of professional learning for staff, and again, our wonderful school counselors, in addition to working with students, have been working with adults. Another example is our recent principal meeting. Dr. Otasha Morgan is our lead school counselor. She provided some mindfulness activities and things for our administrators and principals. So I think we are very mindful, and that has been very much on our radar, especially since the pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Gregory. I know I do have one more, and I'm going to pass it on. So I see a list of a variety of initiatives that have been implemented, and I know that many of the colleges that are listed are not turning out teachers like they used to in the past, and that was also presented earlier in your presentation. What are some other strategies that your department is going to be looking at to diversify our recruitment efforts? And I say that because if you drive around our Richland 2 community, we see billboards posted for several other districts. And so I want to make sure that we are pinpointing ways that we are going to be able to recruit and retain, especially our veteran teachers. So what is your department working on to diversify the recruitment efforts and to focus on our veteran teachers as well? And I'm done.
Okay. One of the key parts is that we do walk-in Wednesdays. And you can follow us on Twitter, any recruitment fair that we're having. If you went on 20, on 77, you guys should have seen the billboards. I've heard a number of people, I've seen billboards myself, in which we were hosting our January 7th career fair. And we're excited to have Mr. Turchetta, who will also help us with recruitment efforts as we are looking at our rebranding of the district as well.
Mrs. Porter.
Yes, I'm looking to find out what opportunities we have for our retiring teachers. Is that in discussion of what reasons they have to stay after year 28?
Can you repeat that once more?
What opportunities are we offering for our retirement teachers after year 28 that would make them want to stay? Many of them have communicated that with not having a change in pay, that they don't see why they would stay when they could go to a part-time position or do something different and it possibly pay more. We've heard that, and it's a loud sound.
So based on the retirement system, which is outside of the scope of what the district can do, the retirement system will penalize some teachers depending on what they want to do, because you have to have a 30-day break in service. So there is one, you have to have the 30-day break in service in order to come back to work, and then you have to come back in a capacity in which they will approve and allow you to continue to draw your retirement. And then you also have to be approved by the State Department of Education. So it's really outside of the district's scope based on the retirement system requirements. Retirees, we welcome them to come back. We welcome to seek for a waiver and hope that it is approved again by the retirement system and by the State Department of Education.
Do they receive any incentives for when they come back in addition to what they would receive as pay as being a retiree?
They would actually receive, if they come back to teach without penalty, they actually will receive whatever their pay is on the salary schedule.
Madam Chair, can I just add something to
Yes, Dr.
Mrs.
Scott.
Porter's question? And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think her question is, what are we doing to stop teachers from retiring at 28? Because they don't have to, they can actually go into 30 years. So what are we doing to retain those teachers who are at 28 so they will not retire? Is that your question? Yes.
That's a personal choice and between them and their financial advisors. So, a lot of people talk to their financial advisors on if benefiting to work 2 additional years is a benefit or not. So we don't necessarily go to them and say, hey, will you not retire? Because I don't know that as a district and as an individual that I want to tell someone or ask someone not to retire. Because it could put the district in an allowable state.
Right, and I don't think that's what we're asking you to do. We're saying what are incentives in place that once you get to 28, what are we putting out there saying, teachers at 28 years, this is what we're offering to make them, to entice them to say, Richland 2 is offering A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I don't think I'm going at 28. I'm going to just remain until 30. So what do we have in place?
Well, as the board, you all are welcome to put something in place during the budget process. And I'm certain Dr. Miley and Ms. Gregory will be happy to accept any recommendations.
Mrs. Nash, Mrs. Porter, any more questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, Mrs. Nash.
So when we had the education update, they said that there was a shortage for teachers for specific areas as well. Is that included in the 224? Because I think at the time they weren't for sure what that number was, but have you guys figured out what that number is, and is that included in here?
Okay, I'm not understanding the
So
question.
when we had the educational update, they said that there was a shortage of teachers in those specific areas. I think it was reading and math, was that correct? And that at the time, they weren't sure how many they needed, but I'm asking, is the vacancies that you guys are looking to fill, the 224, does that include those teachers that we're looking for as far as it pertains to math and reading? For additional staff?
It does.
Okay.
It does. So right now, there's a shortage area in all areas,
Okay.
including elementary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then the other question I had was, when I look at this teacher departure data, so there's several things, and I wonder if there's a crossover where there's 4.5% promotion, advancement within education, 4.4% job dissatisfaction, and then you go into transferring to another district. Sometimes I think like you may see overlap in that, and I'm wondering, are you guys thinking about that when looking at incentives?
We are analyzing all the data. Ms. Gregory, any additional information you want to provide?
No, I think you're correct. We are constantly looking at the climate, the environment, and support for teachers.
So I guess, and you don't have to say, but do you get the feeling that there is one, or there are several maybe underlying reasons that we as the board can address as far as policy goes, or you guys have thoughts on to make sure that, like Ms. Porter and Ms. Washington said, that we fix the problem of retaining teachers? Because if I'm looking at this, a lot of that job dissatisfaction, promotion, personal, family, and transfer, just even looking at transferring to another district, if we can provide incentives for people to stay, then I can't see them, wanting to leave as much. So that's just some of my thoughts. But when I see that, I just wondered if you guys did have some overlap in those areas. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Nash. Dr. Scott.
Yes. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was very detailed, so I do appreciate that. Just two quick questions. One is, when I was looking at the chart of your different career fairs, if you guys don't mind going back to that slide for me, please. I think it's one more with the months right there. I noticed that we're having like one career fair per month, and then in April and May we have two. Why aren't we having more career fairs, especially going up to the February and March, because that's the time when teachers are really making a decision as whether they want to transfer from their district and move to a different district. So why aren't we promoting ourselves a little more in those months so we can try to catch some of those teachers that's actually leaving the other school districts? Because at least by June and July, they've already signed contracts. So I understand, maybe one there, but why aren't we having more like in February, March, and then even April?
Well, if you notice on some of the slides there, that is our heavy travel season. Being a team of two who does the traveling and the recruiting, they're mainly focused on processing any applications that's coming through, working the applications, working the people, the connections that they're meeting at schools and colleges and universities, trying to get those graduates to come out, and also, again, hosting an event here as well.
So we only have two people that's going out, so we couldn't have more like doing virtual, therefore they don't have to go out, or are we only dependent on just those two to do?
So again, they have the recruitment fairs that they'll be going out to in February. Also, they'll have an operations fair and a virtual fair. So not only are they having to travel at multiple schools, they're going to host the operations fair, and we're also hosting the virtual fair for teachers or for all staff members.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Mr. Trapp or Mrs. McFadden?
Yes, I do have a question. About this time last year, we had the discussion about H-1B visas for international teachers. Are we still doing that, and how many do we have, and are we expected to recruit more this year if possible?
We are hoping, we actually met last week, so we are hoping to secure those who are released from their home country. Right now, one of the blocks that we're running into is that the Philippines as a country is not releasing their teachers to stay. So those from other countries are being able to stay, such as Jamaica, India, so they are able to stay, but we are still advancing with H-1Bs, and we are also working with our international teacher companies to provide us with additional replacements as well.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Trapp, do you have a question?
I do have one thing I want to inquire about. When it comes to substitute teachers, last year this time I was in the application process and was able to substitute a few months last year. And one of the things I noticed is when you would go online to take an assignment, there was many categories or many opportunities that said something to the effect that you were filling in. They were looking for a permanent substitute to take the place of a vacant teacher. So those teacher vacancies we have, if you had to guess, do you have any idea how many of those positions we're trying to kind of fill with substitutes at the moment? And I'm just curious. I know that's not the best way to do it, but a substitute in a room is better than not having anybody in the room. But do you have any idea how many of those positions we might be filling with substitutes kind of permanently?
So we don't have permanent subs. What we have is we have school-based subs through the ESSER funds. So each school is allotted at this time 2 school-based subs at this time, so that way. And we also have the partnership with our bus drivers. So I want to thank Mr. Anderson. What our bus drivers do is they actually drive the bus, park the bus, get in their car, go to the school, fill in where needed, leave the school, go back to the bus, and then drive a bus route. And we are so grateful for that partnership. And our elementary schools have that. So I do want to say thank you to those who still have been doing that for the last few years. But right now we are, again, we're in a labor shortage. So we're trying to staff as many school-based subs as we can to help alleviate the schools and the pressure there. For our teachers to be able to be out if they're sick, or for principals to utilize them as needed.
Yeah, every time I substitute taught, it was for someone that was obviously a permanent teacher that was out for the day or half a day or something. Gosh, it was one of the things I was going to. Are we still, I know last year it seemed like some days you're going to be 70 to 100 openings for subs. Are we still that far behind on getting substitutes in the classrooms?
We are again facing a major labor shortage, and yes, we are looking for more subs. So if you all know someone in the public who's listening, the people here today, we all in the room are recruiters. So we can sell the district and sell the positive information and the positive nature and how wonderful our students are, how wonderful our schools are, how wonderful our administration at schools are, to invite them and encourage them to apply here at Richland too. When I'm out in the public, I always ask, if you have a free day, won't you apply to sub, because we need you even if it's for half a day. So we're seeking to fill vacancies as well. And Ms. Gregory will probably tell you, I have told him that since I got here, everyone here serves in the role of a recruiter.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, thank you so much for your presentation. I have a few questions myself. You'd mentioned sending out a letter asking for the teacher's intent prior to the school year and due, I think, shortly after the school year started. Is that letter binding?
So just for clarification, it's a letter of intent that all districts typically send out. What we do is before you have your large recruitment fair, you want to know the employees who are coming back, so that who are coming back or those who are not coming back. It is not binding. However, those who separate from the district, it is binding. It gives teachers and principals an opportunity to fill those vacancies. So we are able to, at the January 7th career fair, for those who knew that they were not coming back, or they had military orders to move, they let their principals know. People who were expecting a child and wanted to stay home, that's information that is valuable for school-level principals to have, so that way they can go ahead and fill those vacancies earlier. I know Ms. Gregory has been a principal. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Okay, well, and I think I misunderstood or didn't quite understand. So if I'm a teacher and I signed my letter of intent that I plan to come and teach, but before I sign my contract, say in April, I, decide to move to California, will that be a break in the contract?
It is not binding.
Okay.
Contracts are due back on or before May the 11th, which is May the 10th at 11:59 p.m.
Okay, thank you. Also, former district leadership had shared with the old board, the former board, that there was a goal of 95% a retention goal. How are we doing with that for the next school year with all employees?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Gregory on that.
Well, sorry. I used as an example the academics division. We created a spreadsheet, as many other divisions and areas are doing, and monitoring on a regular basis where we are with that.
Well, and I appreciate that. I guess my question would be, just looking at the trend of the certified retention rate, was that even, is it an achievable goal? Is it a realistic goal? Last year we had 80%. We've never had 95% in any of the charts. Why would we pick 95% as a retention rate goal?
We worked, the previous administration, we worked with them to select that goal, and it is a very challenging and aggressive goal.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. And my final question, you had the bonus money. Have we talked about, or has there been a thought of offering a retention bonus for teachers who sign contracts coming back for the next school year?
So I put a star on here
I saw
because
that.
that is a board's action.
Okay.
For the last few years, we've given you guys have approved the retention bonus that has been traditionally given before spring break. That again has been the $1,500 grossed up, so therefore employees can bring home at least $1,000 bonus.
But I guess I'll comment on that. I didn't perceive that to be a retention bonus because to me it was just, thank you so much for helping us through difficult times. But I didn't see that it was a tie to them signing a contract for the following year. That's just my opinion, and that's something that the board can talk about in the future. I'm finished with my questions. I know a couple of my colleagues had additional questions. Mrs. Porter, to start with you.
Yes, often I see that we have phenomenal teachers that will leave and take leadership positions in neighboring districts. And it may be that they didn't have an opportunity or there wasn't one available here. Is there a way that our administrators are able to see those coming up in leadership, or those that are interested in leadership? Is there a list that they're able to see in advance so that if they know that these vacancies are coming, that they'll be able to see them before they go away? Of outstanding leaders that are doing well in interviews and so forth.
So positions are advertised. I work closely with, for school leadership, work closely with the executive directors on posting any retirements for AP or principal vacancies. So those are posted fairly timely. So therefore, individuals are able to see those.
So does the administration have to rely on communicating with each other when someone does well and before they leave to go to an outside district, when they see leadership within our own school district that's doing well? Because oftentimes if they go from...
I'm going to defer to
I was going to
Ms.
say
Gregory
Dr.
on
Franklin
that.
and her team work with aspiring administrators or administrators and developing leadership in the district, and do a great job with the executive directors and the leadership team that we have.
Okay, so leaders, there are teachers who they have a way to, if they want to eventually go up in leadership, there are programs or something that they can participate in so that will help them if they want to get into administration. Okay. Training aspiring principals. And if a teacher is interested in that, who should they contact? Their principal. Okay. All right, and everyone is eligible for that, is that correct? Okay.
Dr. Scott?
Oh, I was just going to say, and we encourage that too. And, we do have some leadership roles. We have an example with our PD coordinator, who teaches and also serves as the district PD coordinator. And so some of those crossover opportunities too.
Dr. Scott?
No questions, thank you.
Mrs. Nash?
I just had one question about the career fairs that you guys do. Do you hand out like a survey at the end so people can give feedback on how they felt the survey, how they felt the career fair went, and then do you guys use that to figure out changes to make to career fairs, or are they pretty much like a standard thing?
Generally what happens is that the team will send out surveys. They send out an email thanking them for coming and ask them to provide any feedback, so that way we can also make sure we have everything in place for the next time.
Thank you so much.
Board members, Mrs. McFadden.
Okay, so we know that it is a nationwide issue of teacher shortages. So everybody's wanting teachers, and as you can see, there was only like 2,000 that are actually graduating with the teacher field. So everybody is pulling from this pool of so many. So are we in a position where we're starting to think, okay, there's not very many people coming out. How can we change our system, change our classrooms in such a way that the teachers that we do have are able to reach more students? I know a lot of times last year, students who didn't have a substitute, that 100 plus that are empty, that need substitute filling, they're in the gym. With all other classes, you could have Spanish class, math class, geometry track class. They're all in the gym together, supposedly doing homework. We're in a multimedia classroom, probably on their Chromebooks or their headphones watching whatever. So my question is that can we start looking at other ways in which we can utilize the teachers that we have? And I'll just throw this out here, not to get in the weeds or anything like that, but an idea would be to have a teacher teach 2 to 3 days of a class of math with certain students face-to-face, put those other students in another class virtually, and switch it out. Because it doesn't seem like we're getting more teachers. It seems like everybody wants teachers. There's not any available. So can we shift the focus to try to attract them with money and bonuses and things like that we may not be able to provide every year? If we can shift that thought to how can we utilize our new virtual platform more efficiently to reach more students, half a day here, half a day there, so that kids that have a teacher that isn't there all year and a substitute, they'll actually get face-to-face learning with some type of teacher that's qualified and certified in that area 2 to 3 days out of the week, 2 to 3 days, do your homework, and switch those students out. Something like that we can use to help our students and our teachers with this immense shortage that the whole nation is facing.
Well, Ms. McFadden, you have the expert in the room, so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Gregory, who's
I knew you were going to come to me. We are looking at all options, and one of the things we are having conversations about are looking at the schedules that schools have, and if we're really maximizing those. We also have a team that has been going to professional development, visiting schools, talking to the State Department about waivers and looking at some competency-based options. So we have teams of folks working on it, people visiting PD, doing everything we can, looking at some options. And again, looking at the time that we have, and are we maximizing that time? And can we do some things with the schedules we have to better address some of these issues that we're seeing? Thanks. And the other thing we didn't talk about or mention is the cadre. You listed the instructional coaches, but they have been very powerful, and our partnership, I'd like to mention just our partnership with Carolina, with USC, with Carolina TIP, where the USC graduates, they followed them for 3 years and provide additional support and training, which has been very beneficial.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. Anybody else? Questions?
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, Mrs. Washington.
So I guess I'm hearing you say that the support that you need from the board, because you stated earlier, is a retention plan for veteran teachers or to recruit teachers. Is that the assistance that your department is needing from us?
So what we would need from you, and Ms. Gregory, I don't want to speak for you, is that if there's financial incentive that you as a board would like to approve, again, we have to work with Dr. Molly and Ms. Gregory, if there's a financial incentive for retirees, if that's the pleasure of the board, think that you could build it into your budget proposal.
Ms. Agostini, just one more comment.
Dr. Scott.
Not anything that you need to answer right now, but maybe later in the board doc. Can you give us a review of how many teachers actually have been pulled to work at district level positions within the last 3 years?
Any other questions, board members? Thank you so much, Mrs. Williams. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Item 11.2, the review of policy DBJ. Mrs. Gregory.
All right, at this time, Dr. Harry Miley, who is our Senior Chief Financial Officer, is coming to the podium to review policy DBJ budget transfers. Dr. Miley.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I am here to answer questions and give you a couple of thoughts. One of the things, if I could, follow up on questions just now about the budget and changes and bonus plans or retention bonuses. What we would need to do is evaluate that, get a plan together, get estimates of the cost of that, and then build that into the budget request, and then you would be seeing that at your turn to approve the budget. That process is a normal process that we would do with any proposal in terms of estimating the cost, then getting in the budget requirements, then if it, how high it is in the priority list and how much funding we have, which is a segue to this board policy. One of the things, I apologize, I did not get, I knew this was on the agenda tonight, but I did not know that there was a recommendation until this morning sometime, and I did not have time today to put together some information for you other than my thoughts. But I would ask that you consider a couple of things. Our district is a big district. With the recommendation for a $75,000 limit, there are districts with that level of thresholds. But our district's pretty big. If we've got 20 elementary schools, every school gets a discretionary budget at the beginning of the year, and their principals work with how they're going to allocate that. The elementary schools are relatively small budgets, that is maybe $80,000 to $100,000. That's still a lot of money. A middle school might get $150 or so. High schools would get $300 or so each on every year, and at their discretion. If every elementary school decided to use $5,000 differently than originally budgeted, that would be above this threshold. And we wouldn't know it until after they had done it. So there are some concerns that we have in terms of monitoring that kind of a budget threshold. But again, it's board policy, whatever y'all recommend and adopt. I would argue that would be a pretty difficult thing for a district this size. That $75,000 threshold is probably about 0.2 of 1%, 0.2%. But my biggest concern is, and I certainly understand, we had a board-approved threshold in years past. I can't remember exactly when, but this current version was passed and amended that did have a board-approved threshold in it. That would be one thing that we might look at, that I would recommend, is to go back and look at that and see if that would be appropriate. I'm concerned about the current budget cycle from the state. We had a tremendous change last year, and we have a new funding formula. They haven't quite told us what the new funding formula is, other than their new tweaks coming from the legislature. So my concern right now is to adopt a fairly, in my opinion doesn't count, but my opinion is that the 75,000 is a little low and restrictive for a budget for a district our size. But I would prefer to have, right now, is to, whatever y'all deem as board policy is your prerogative. But I'm concerned about the state's position and what the state does with our entire funding this year, and to adopt a transfer policy now, or a very restrictive one, I would have a lot of concern with. But again, those are my thoughts, and be glad to put together some more information for you if you'd like to consider it. I didn't even have time to look at other districts around, our size around the state. We can do that as well. So with that, Ms. Gregory, did that answer?
Madam Chair.
I'm going to ask a clarifying question before we start discussion. Is that all right? I'm reading the policy, and I was on the board when this was passed previously. I have to smile because it was lumped in with a bunch of policies, and my colleague, Dr. Scott, and I, after they threw in 40 policies, were, wait a second, but the vote was taken and they wouldn't call it back. So with that being said, my understanding was transfers between major budget categories, I thought that was like salaries. I didn't think it was going into a school district's discretionary funds and a 10% change there.
I agree. It depends on the interpretation of major budget categories of who defines that. But you're right. Our interpretation of the budget transfers, as is in the current policy and in the one that was changed, must have been about 2017 or so, 2018, that we changed the last.
This was changed. It says August of 2018.
2018. That would be my interpretation. If I was making that call, I would say it's the major budget categories adopted in the major budget document that y'all approve.
Can you tell us what the major budget categories are?
Think I can.
Madam Chair, while he's looking that up, may I make a comment?
Sure.
I did research some neighboring districts. I'm sorry I couldn't share that in between the short time that I had today. But I know that Richland 1 did not have any number in this policy and as a restrictive number, and Orangeburg that just consolidated as 1 did not have any number at all. And then I also looked for a district that had a number, and it was a smaller district like Aiken had the number of 5,000. And at that point, I just stopped. But
Thanks. I have the Aiken one as well, and then Lexington Richland 5, I believe, has $10,000.
Okay.
Good. Did you find the answer to the major?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. The major budget categories are salaries, benefits, utilities, property and operation contracts, maintenance and repairs, professional services, supplies and equipment, and other expenditures. So they are broad categories of expenditures. And if that's what is the understanding of the transfer, then that is, I mean, you would not, $75,000 would not be a large transfer for any of those budget categories.
Madam Chair.
Mrs. Nash.
Okay. So here's one of the issues that this policy really concerns me, is because if you will, for the public to hear, what is 10% currently of our general fund?
Our general fund budget is $33 million.
Right, correct. So that is a large amount of money for us to wait for quarterly financial reports and not have any oversight over.
And I agree with that. In fact, I think before it was changed the last time, it was 10% of that budget line, which would be 10% of one of these lines that I just mentioned. And
what would that figure be, if I may ask?
Well, 10% of the, and these can happen. For instance, the property and operation contracts, those are some of our insurance, our maintenance, our Sodexo, our Service Solution Custodial. Some of those contracts are extremely large and have changed, and 10% would be $500,000 or so, and some of the time they have, well, that budget line is 11, so 10% would be $1 million, but last year we had one of our contracts go up, I believe it was around $600,000 in 1 year. So, but again, that's something that is certainly more reasonable than 10% of the general fund budget.
Dr. Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think you kind of hit on my first question when Dr. Miley said that discretionary funds. I'm not aware of schools being able to use discretionary funds with line items to move money, and I didn't realize that high schools are now getting $300,000 as a discretionary fund.
It's based on student enrollment and their level of PIP qualified students. Yes,
So this year and last year, we've been able to issue over $300,000 in discretionary funds to high schools.
Yes, ma'am.
With that, where's the accountability? Because I know that's the discretion of the principal. So with that and this amount of money, who are keeping the books? Is that just the bookkeeper, or is that something that's also coming back to the district office level for accountability?
Yes, ma'am. One is we have a procurement process that they must adhere to. So there's part of the accountability right there. They can spend money on different things, but they have to procure it by our procurement code regardless. So
Right, and I think that was one of the IG questions, that we did not have a procurement code in place. That's something that we needed to
Well, actually,
secure.
he actually wrote us a letter and said that he missed that. We do have a procurement code.
Okay.
We have not adopted the statewide new model that is ready, that we are still in compliance, that we're planning on adopting by June 30. So we do have a procurement code. We've had one for quite some time, since '06, I believe. What he said was we couldn't produce the letter from State Department of Education that said you're in compliance with our procurement code. We couldn't find it. The State Department couldn't find the letter that they say they had sent us. But at the end, we do have a procurement code that we've been following since '06, and we're planning to adopt a new state model by June 30 of this year, which you will also approve. We're planning to get that to you hopefully by April or so, because we need that process approved by you, and then once you approve it, the state has to approve it again. So,
Thank you for that, and maybe you guys can get that in the next board doc. I, too, had an opportunity to research schools with the budget, and I saw where there was none, as my colleague stated, and I've seen from 5,000, 10,000, 75,000, 150, and the largest that I've seen was 250,000. So I think that's something that we need to talk about, because I feel uncomfortable even supporting anything at that amount without accountability from school board members, because that's just part of one of our duties, that we are responsible for the budget, maintaining that and making sure that we're following proper procedures for that.
exactly.
So thank you.
That's why we by board policy provide you with quarterly updates and statements of our financial status each quarter that shows you where we have spent funds by category according to our budget process.
Right, and I totally get that, and that's why I guess later, at a later time, that would be a great time to talk about that, because when we're talking about quarterly reports, sometimes things are actually purchased. Like, I know we have some new vehicles, which I'm pretty sure we probably needed, but we don't know, the cost of the vehicles. We don't know how many were given. We don't know why. We don't know what has even occurred with the old vehicles. So waiting for a quarterly report when you spend that type of money, I think is a disservice, to the taxpayers, waiting for a quarterly report. But I respect that, because that's what we had set up. So that's nothing against you, that's just how the board had it set up. So we do move forward. I would like to see those reports on a more regular basis so we can be held accountable for the monies that we spent. But that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Mrs. Washington.
Yes, thank you so much for the information. So I guess, not to echo what my board colleagues have shared, but this policy really did bring up a lot of red flags and concerns for me for the fact that we have a $331 million. That means that a superintendent has $33 million to spend, and only if he goes over, or he or she goes over 10%, is that information reported to the board. So I feel like as a board, we can put in accountability measures to make sure that we get the information if it is under 10%. But my question for you, Dr. Miley, is why was this policy instituted? Like, can you give me some examples or things that have been used, the 10% has been used for, or the transfer has been used for?
We might transfer from department to department for an FTE that is decided that there's a greater need in mental health area than technology, classroom technology coach. And that FTE might need to go from one department to another, and that would be a transfer. And an FTE is more than an FTE with a seasoned FTE with fringe benefits and salary is more than $75,000. So I think that would be an example of not a frequent, but occasional type of change and transfer that is done at the district that is still within the boundaries of, one, the overall budget that you approve, so it doesn't go over that amount, and two, within the broad categories that we just outlined a few minutes ago.
And then, do you have any reports to show us of how the money has been spent in the past?
We have, I'm not sure of your question. We have our annual audit that shows how we spend money on every type of line item. Do you mean individual purchases? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yes, an audit would be fine. Do we have an updated audit that you can provide the board?
We're required by state law to have an annual audit every year.
And that's going to detail everything, including the less than 10% of how the money is being spent?
It tells you how we spend it.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yes.
Mrs. Porter, did you have another question? Oh, Mrs. Nash.
Oh, okay. So I think I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, on the part about, I guess, what we interpret as budget transfers. How is there like a definition that everybody can be on the same page of what that is?
Well, if it was up to me, I would say the major categories, budget categories, as outlined in the budget that we bring to you, that the board approves.
Okay. So, and how would we communicate that to, say, schools and things like that? Was that something that you all would do? Is that something that has to be written it up?
Yes.
Okay. So that's how something has to be written up. Okay. Okay, and then lastly, I wanted to know, like, we all are new, so we just got here in November. But I know we were supposed to have one. I imagine, was there supposed to be one for, if the quarterly financial report, was there supposed to be one for December, or is it based on another calendar?
There's a second quarter financial report that we owe you.
Okay, okay, that's, I was wondering, because we didn't see it, so I was wondering. Okay, that's all the questions I had.
Thank you.
Any more questions, comment? Mr. Trapp?
I had a lot of questions, and they're all over the place. Let's see if I can pull one out here. One of the things that struck me when I first started reading this more than anything is the current policy looks as if really anything can be transferred up to the 10%, and it doesn't require any real involvement with the school board. In fact, all it really says is if it exceeds the 10%, the board will be informed. There's no approval required for any of this from the board, and that to me really just sounds like a bad idea. And so I guess my question would be, the board meets normally twice a month. I know we're talking about having to move things around. It would seem logical to me, and I hope I don't show how naive I am about these things, but it would seem logical to me that if there's a need, if we're running a smooth process here, that we would have enough time to determine that need to where we could easily get board approval for most things. Am I wrong in thinking that, or is it more tricky than that?
Well, I would think you're right most of the time. There are, some of the problems are that there's delays between the budget development, the expenditure, the receipt of the invoice, and reporting that invoice, coding that invoice in, and actually closing that out. So one of the problems is time in terms of someone going and buying something and then us knowing it and that it's suddenly above what the budget was because they may have done that. So again, we monitor that with our procurement process, make sure that it's procured correctly, but at the same time, we have a large district.
Would you say that most of these anomalies, they're not things like salary, they are things like purchases, purchases of services, and
Exactly.
repairs of equipment, things like that is what the wild cards are?
Our salaries are much more predictable because we know our FTEs and we know who's working and who's not and who's left. And so our salary surprises are less.
Yeah, because I know I do a lot of work, commercial work, and I know at USC when a lot of work I do there, some of it's paid quickly, some of it isn't paid for 60 or 90 days sometimes. I'm going to assume that most of the work we're talking about that's unexpected is not something that we wait 2 or 3 months to pay for. Is that
Correct.
something most of our vendors require quick?
A silly example might be we have a line item for maintenance, and we have a $800,000 boiler blow up, and we need it now, and we need to get it, we need to place the order because that school is cold or hot, and we need to fix it. And so we need to put that order in, we procure it correctly, but if we wait for a board approval, it might take a week or two. Now, we certainly could have a special call board meeting or something like that, but that's one of the things that I have the trust in our maintenance department that they're going to do whatever they need to do to make sure that school is hot or warm and comfortable. And so that's just a simple example of the surprises that we have occasionally that's difficult when we estimate the budgets for a full 12-month period.
No, that's a very good and to the point example. That is yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about with that.
Yeah. And that doesn't happen every day, but that happens, you know.
Yeah. Well, my next question would be, is there any way, I know the old policy that was changed in August of 2018, it had a lot of different categories. It would seem logical maybe that we should develop some specific, like for example, the things you're talking about, a boiler blowing up, that obviously is a big deal, and that's not a transfer. I don't know. I'm not sure how to express what I'm thinking, but I guess in my mind, if we had some more specific guidelines, it might not say. This just seems so vague to me. It really is not very specific, and I think if you want to run things efficiently, you've got to. If you want to keep people working at their best and honest, you really have to be specific about stuff. But.
And again, I'll be happy to work on that for the board for your consideration. Again, today I didn't have that time.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Board members, any more questions? Oh, Mrs. McFadden?
Dr. Miley, when we were talking about this, we were thinking about that $75,000, and we thought that was a good number, but clearly it's not, given the information that you just provided for us. So, 10% of our current general fund is a bit excessive. So what would your suggestion be for an amount that would be, something for us to think about, to consider? And I would like to change the wording of it for it to be approved by the board. So what would be that number, that sweet spot for you?
I would like a chance to think about with my team a little bit, but probably something in the 10% range of those major line items and that was what we had before. I mean, that was what was in the board policy, and have something like that approved. Before you could do that, it would take approval by the board.
So let me ask you this, and I just want to be clear. So you're saying, like, for salaries, you'd have a salary as CTE, an FTE for certified teacher, and you just switch just within that particular category. So if it was a maintenance category, you would just switch between the maintenance category. So this isn't necessarily 10% of the entire general fund, or is that just, could be read either way?
I could see why the board would like to change the 10% of the general fund. I don't have an issue with that. And so I certainly understand that. I think the 10% of the budget line items, I think that's reasonable. But again, you all need to consider that, and I can get you some more information from our perspective about things to consider. We want to be accountable, but we want to be responsive to the district and make sure things get paid for and are done. That's our job.
Mrs. Gregory, did you have any comments, or?
No, I appreciate Dr. Miley being candid and giving his recommendations and the explanations.
All right, thank you. Board members, are there any more comments or recommendations? Mrs. Porter?
May I suggest that Dr. Miley go back with his staff and work with our superintendent and report back to us with a couple of options and suggestions that may be more feasible for us?
I am very happy to go along with that. Is there any opposition?
Yes.
Or other recommendations? Any
Yes, there are other recommendations.
What would your recommendation be,
Well, we're the
Mrs. or Dr.
policymakers.
Scott?
We're the
Yes.
policymakers, and I think we all have had an opportunity to take a look at this. And this is a ridiculous amount, and I think you mentioned earlier that when this was changed, we did not support it. I just want us to be mindful that we do respect the decisions of the superintendent and Dr. Miley. But again, we are the policymakers, and I think we need to make sure we remember that when we ask these things or suggest these things, that this falls on us. We are the policymakers. And with that, I think before we move forward with asking what, they feel, I think we need to see and listen to hear if any board members have any suggestions. I think many of us stated earlier that we looked at other school districts and the amounts that we've seen. For right now, I think we need to have something in place, because I feel very uncomfortable walking away with nothing in place. We can always make that change if need be. And then two, in my history of being on the board for almost 12 years, I am not aware of, and I could be totally wrong, but I am not aware of anything happening so quickly where a department had to make a major purchase, and I could be wrong. Maybe it was just not shared with us. So because I have not been shared that, I'm not in a panic or a sense of urgency with allowing this to stay like this. I think we need to move forward with an amount and pay attention to the taxpayers' dollars and not make a foolish mistake of not being able to have something in place when it comes to this policy. I think we've waited for a couple of years to get this policy on the agenda, many, many years. So now that it's here, I think we need to make a decision, because we've all had time to really go back and do the research.
Is there a recommendation then? Does someone have a recommendation?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden?
I'd like to make a recommendation that the last line be changed to transfer between major budget categories that exceed, and I'm going to say $175,000, can I get agreement with the board, from general fund will be approved by the board.
And we're not voting right now. We'll just listen for some consensus. This was supposed to be discussion-based. There've been a lot of questions asked. So, if the board members have thoughts, please speak up and share whether you're in agreement with Mrs. McFadden's suggestion. I am in alignment right now. While I agree with Dr. Scott that we ultimately, as the board, need to make the decision, I think we still need to gather a little bit more information that I'd love to hear from finance. Mrs. Porter.
I'd just like to share that there's no disrespect whatsoever with any years of experience. I know that I'm new on this board. I was just reviewing policy BG, BGD, board policy with review of administrative rules. And it stated that upon recommendation from the superintendent, the board will use a careful and orderly process in examining proposals prior to action upon them by the board. And as I read this, when we're looking at policies, it did include that we would use the recommendation from the superintendent and the staff. And so I just want to make sure, as he stated, he had not had time to look over it, that we are giving adequate time for all points of view, but no disrespect whatsoever for anybody's experience.
Let me ask this board, is it possible for us to have Dr. Miley to do his research and the board come back at the next meeting with a solid recommendation? Because again, this is just a discussion base. So we can have, based upon what we hear, we can have a recommendation for the board in the first reading of a definitive number or percentage to include in it after we gain a little bit more information from Dr. Miley.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question to Dr. Miley?
Yes, Mrs. Nash.
What time frame would you be able to have something for us by the next board meeting?
Certainly. I'll certainly
Okay.
get it to you before the next board meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would that be possible?
Certainly.
Okay. And will it also include like the plan to make sure that like how we were talking about the budget transfers, the categories are, I kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of loosey-goosey, not like put in very defined terms for schools and principals?
I think I can do that, yes.
Mr. Trapp.
Yeah, if I can make one more, or share one more thought. I think in my mind, it might be advantageous for us to come up with at least a couple of categories and maybe some definitions. Your example earlier about the boiler is very spot on. You know, you can have, the reason I say that is we just had a historic freeze, and I spent the last couple of weeks at USC replacing broken water lines. Millions of dollars of damage because of a cold snap. And I know, I want to say this past school year, last summer, when we come back to school, there was a school that did not have their HVAC systems up and running. I think, if I remember right, it was a big deal. You know, we can't have school not taking place because we have some mechanical issues or things like those things. You can't foresee things like that. You can have things in place to take care of unexpected, but there's a difference between unexpected and an emergency. And obviously, you know, we can't restrict our finances when it comes to emergencies, because we will have people very unhappy if we have children that won't be able to attend school because a building's closed. So in my mind, it would seem logical that we could have some categories in here to allow for the incredibly expensive emergencies, but not let those dollar figures come into the things that don't have to happen so quick and could be planned for a little bit.
But I think I could also give you some concrete examples of past transfers that has happened in the district, large or small, just some examples of what we're talking about. So perhaps that would help.
All right, thank you, Dr. Miley. Any other comments or discussion, recommendations? So we'll move forward with Dr. Miley bringing us more specific details and having board members prepared to have specific recommendations as well at the first reading. All right, thank you, Dr. Miley.
Thank you.
Item 11.3, review of policy BEDGA, board records. Mrs. Gregory.
All right, we welcome Dr. Marshall Franklin, Deputy Superintendent, to the podium to review policy BEDGA, board records.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. Madam Chair, members of the board, policy BEDGA pertains to public records. The policy provides the board a procedure for obtaining public records from the district in a manner that is more expeditious than the procedure prescribed by the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act, or what we refer to as FOIA. The provisions made for the board, for board members in BEDGA do not preclude a board member from requesting public records as a member of the general public. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Franklin. Board members, actually, Mrs. Nash, this was your request. Discussion, please.
So currently, as it stands right now, there's no metrics for when we could receive information to be able to say like in a timely manner, especially with like things like we're talking about today. If we were to request those things, it says expeditious. There's no time frame. That's kind of like out there, and we may or may not get it because there's no actual time frame. So under just a suggested revision possibly is maybe under where it says by individual board members, where it starts there, we include along with rationale for the request to the superintendent who may refer such request to the communications department. And then under that, these particular requests will be processed within 2 weeks at no cost to individual board members. If the request is not able to be completed within 2 weeks, the superintendent will provide a written expectation for when board members should receive the requested information and the reason more time is needed for that request.
Board members, any more comments, questions?
I do. May
Okay.
I ask one?
Please do.
Question, or just a
Please.
consideration, if the board is amenable to it, to specify a number of business days instead of 2 weeks. So for example, the week of Thanksgiving break, if the request comes in that Monday, we're not doing business Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And so to say 2 weeks would mean like literally on the calendar 2 weeks from that day. So perhaps 10, 15 business days would help us not to get into
That
binds
sounds
such
good
as that.
to me. 15 business days?
Well, 10 business days would be 2 weeks. So
10 business days?
Well, any other discussion or comments? Do you have, Mrs. Nash, did you want to say anything additional?
No, that's just.
Okay, and I'm going to make a couple of comments regarding this policy. This policy was actually put in place because of a request that I made in February of 2020 when we gave out the first bonuses and gave money to libraries and teacher supplies. I asked district leadership if this money needed to be spent by the end of June 2020, and I was told no, only to find out at a school visit about a month later that, in fact, it did need to be spent by the end of June 2020. And so when I requested information from district leadership, I was questioned why, and I asked for the information. Initially, I thought it was because it was a school-led initiative, but it was not. It was district-led. And the more I pressed, wanting the documentation, the communication that went out to employees from administration, I was told that I was out of line because I was essentially asking for communication from a staff-to-staff member. So this is what our old board and district leadership left us with. I have spoken with Alan Wilson, our Attorney General, and many of his attorneys there, and they have cited a number of times when we were going through this policy process in the summer of 2020 that as elected officials, as board members, should the board request information from administration as it pertains to our position, we should have access to the information we request. So I respect my colleagues. The only other board that I know in the state that actually has this is Lexington Richland 5. And I would encourage my colleagues to go look this up on other boards' policies online to see that 90%, and I'm pretty sure close to 90%, do not have anything that restricts their board members to get information. So it would be my wish to rescind this policy. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mrs. McFadden.
I just have a comment. I understand you would like to rescind this policy, but I would like to make sure that for us as this particular board, that we have something in policy that says that when we request something, that we should get it, because even though other districts don't have that, they may not have the concerns that we have with getting particular information. This board, we have issues with trying to get information requests. So just for the time being or what have you, I would like to keep this as a policy to say that, so that we can say, well, it's in policy that if we request something, we should be able to get it. And I'm not saying we should get it within 10 days because I feel like that's a short time restraint because there's 7 of us. If we're all requesting something, 2 and 3 things, that's a lot for the staff to have to get. But I do want to keep this policy and say if I can just know that, if it's going to be a month down the road to get something, I'm okay with that as long as I know that someone's working on it and I'll eventually get it. 10 days, if I submit something and they submit something, it's a lot to get done, depending on what you're asking. So I know there are some things about volume and size. That second paragraph that says that the superintendent has the ability to decide whether or not board members get certain information, I would like to strike that entire sentence. That's about 3 rows, actually 4 rows. I don't think that a superintendent should have the ability to tell board members that they can't have information that is pertaining to the district. That's just my personal thoughts, so I would like to keep the policy and strike that entire last paragraph.
The last paragraph or the first paragraph?
I'm sorry, the second paragraph.
Any other comments, questions? One thing that I want to highlight to our board members is it says that request in the middle made by individual board members to the superintendent. There's been a little confusion with new board members. When I first came on the board, the request was always made by a board member to the superintendent. My practice was always to copy the chair. Board requests do not need to come through the chair to the superintendent. You do that on your own and request. You can, send me a CC, but you all are welcome to communicate individually with our interim superintendent. You do not need to make a request through me to speak with Mrs. Gregory. Any other questions or comments?
I did. Dr. Franklin, because we're talking about the size of, materials that may be asked for, was there a recommendation that you had other than 10 business days? Possibly?
I believe the clause that says if the request is not able to be completed
Yeah,
within
so
10
does
business days, it
that
catches
cover that?
Mhm.
Okay.
Depending on the volume of the response.
Okay, so you're saying in that second paragraph that I want to strike that we should try to maybe focus on something about the volume and size.
Right, so here was the example. So if these particular requests will be processed within 10 business days and at no cost to individual board members. If the request is not able to be completed within 10 business days, the superintendent will provide a written expectation for when board members should receive the requested information.
Okay, that's fine, yeah.
Mrs. Porter.
So I'm trying to understand what the purpose was of the line that Ms. McFadden wants to have removed. Is it possible that this was put in there, I don't know, for due to the timing? Like, for example, if there's something big happening at the district office, a report that's due, or I don't know. I want to make sure that we're not removing it and it was put there for a specific purpose.
Right. Now, the intent of this policy is for information that would typically be requested through FOIA. And so basically it makes a provision for board members to not have to go through FOIA to be able to get the information more quickly than they would if they did a FOIA request. Perhaps that statement is in the policy if the request is for information that isn't covered by FOIA.
So that would require a staff member to get the information, correct?
Or just information that isn't isn't a FOIA-able document, perhaps.
I see. So could it require personal information of the staff member or?
Maybe.
Okay. So I'm concerned that it may violate someone's privacy, or there may be information that someone is not comfortable with sharing.
Dr. Franklin, that information would be redacted, regardless of whether it's FOIA'd or if it's provided to a board member through a board member request. Any of that personal information would not be shared with the board.
Okay, thank you.
And then two, would you say that last part does kind of take care of that, where it says about if the request is not able to be done, that you guys would just let us know in writing?
In terms of timeline,
right?
Yes, not content.
Okay, perfect.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Dr. Franklin. Moving on to item 12, agenda items for next meeting. Mrs. Gregory.
All right. You have items for February 14th. Do we have any additional items?
No, please go ahead and read what we have planned for our February 14th, 2023 meeting.
I don't have that in front of me
Oh,
because I don't have Christine's notes. I'm sorry.
excuse us.
Thank you. Thank you, and I apologize. We have the call to order, approval of agenda, public sessions, student appeals, breach of contracts, employment recommendations, and certified releases. Public session at 6:30, our inspirational moment, Pledge of Allegiance. Consent agenda, the approval of the consent agenda, approval of minutes from the previous meeting, classified employment releases and in-district transfers. First of our public participation. And our voting on executive items, our breach of contract, student appeals, employment recommendations and releases. And then under unfinished business, action requested, approval for policy BEDB, board agenda, and approval also for policy BEDN, board members' use of district-owned portable devices. Under our unfinished business, no action requested, a revision proposal of policy DBJ, budget transfers, also policy BEDGA, board records. We will have an update on our strategic plan. And then, of course, we'll talk about agenda items for February 28th, second public participation, board comments, executive session if needed, voting on executive session items, and adjournment. Thank you, Ms. Agostini.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory. Board members, I will, Mrs. Washington, discussion?
Yes, so not for a presentation, but is there some way that we can get some kind of update on, from transportation? I have received numerous calls and have parents that are concerned about academics when it comes to students being, having to arrive late to school. And I am certainly appreciative, and I know that our bus drivers are working very diligently, but I am getting an overwhelming response from parents about students failing classes. They're not feeling like they're getting the support from administration or from the district, and I am overly concerned about safety when it comes to students being left at bus stops, and nobody has been contacted about, where buses are. So if we can get some type of maybe update in a board brief or something that can be put in the consent agenda for us to review, I'd like to get that information, please.
Thank you, Mrs. Washington. Can you just follow up with an email to Mrs. Gregory and myself as well?
Absolutely.
Any other suggestions, board members? And if you do come up with suggestions, please forward them for the time being until we get the new policy passed to Mrs. Gregory and myself. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Oh, yes, Mrs. McFadden.
Also, if we could get an update, again, not a presentation. We've heard district office staff express that they need support as far as, help with employment and things like that. And I would like to get a list of the employment positions of the district staff and when they started, like if there's someone that trickled through, elementary, middle, and high, how long they've been in the district and how long they've been in that particular position, as well as their salary grade. I don't need the names or anything like that, but just the district office staff, their positions, or whatever department it is, the 5, if I could have it listed in there like that, and then how long they've been in that position in the district, and then their salary.
Thank you, Mrs. McFadden.
Thank you.
Moving on, may I have a motion to move the board superintendent comments following our second executive session?
Madam Chair?
Mrs. McFadden.
I move that we move our board and superintendent comments to after our second executive session.
There's been a motion by Mrs. McFadden. Do I have a second?
Second.
And the motion has been seconded by Mrs. Nash. Any discussion? There's no discussion? Is the motion correct? Mrs. McFadden, the motion's correct? Okay, board members, please vote. And the vote is 7 yes, 0 no. The motion carries. The board will convene an executive session. May I have a motion to come out of executive session?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trapp.
I move that we concluded executive session at 10:58, I'm sorry, hang on. Yeah, 9:58 p.m. and have reconvened in public session.
I second.
The motion has been made by Mr. Trapp and seconded by Mrs. Porter. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. And the motion is correct. Board members, please vote. And the motion passes 7-0. There are 7 yes, 0, or excuse me, there are 7 yes and 0 no's. Moving on, voting on executive session items as needed. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair,
Dr. Scott.
yes, I would like to make a motion that student number 1 be returned back to their home school on strict probation.
Second.
I'm sorry, the second came from Mrs. McFadden. So the motion was made by Dr. Scott and seconded by Mrs. McFadden. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Is the motion correct?
The motion is correct.
Board members, please vote.
If we can go back, my apology, and if we can say return to homeschool. Thank you.
Okay, board,
Now the motion is correct.
all right,
Thank you.
board members, please vote.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mrs. McFadden.
to be clear, homeschool is not actually school at home. It's actually the zoned school for the student.
Okay, thanks.
Ms.
for the-
McFadden, we call that homeschool,
Yeah.
and they have to go back to their homeschool.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
so the vote is 6 yes, 1 no. The motion carries. Moving on to superintendent and board comments. We'll start with Mrs. McFadden.
I just want to say thank you so much to all my board colleagues. We have a great meeting tonight. I appreciate all the work that was put in on the policies and things like that. Thank you to Ms. Gregory for the great job that she's done on her first night as an interim superintendent. You all have a great night. We'll see you in about 2 weeks.
Mr. Trapp.
Yeah, I'd just like to express my gratitude to everybody in the district, especially the teachers and the staff and everybody that works so hard to make our district so good. We appreciate everything you do, and we are really, I think we're really wanting to just make your lives better, and hope to see a lot of good work in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Trapp. Mrs. Washington.
I just want to say thank you to all of the students, the parents, and faculty and staff of Lonnie B. Nelson. What an excellent presentation tonight. And to all of the principals and the chefs that presented us with some delicious food on this evening. It was so great to connect with colleagues or with administration. And I had an exciting visit at the Eagle's Nest and can't wait to visit some more schools in Richland too. Thanks everybody for all you do, and God bless Richland too.
Mrs. Porter.
Thank you all schools for the wonderful gifts and surprises that we received this evening for Board Appreciation Month. Thank you for the culinary students that prepared the meal tonight. It was fantastic. And Lonnie B. Nelson as well. I thought they were definitely a treat. Thank you, faculty and staff, for your presentations. And of course, thank you, board colleagues, for all your contributions thus far. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mrs. Porter. Mrs. Nash.
Well, I think it was a banner day. We got great food. Shout out to whoever made the Brussels sprouts. We had a great conversation about that. They were so delicious. So thank you to the students, to the chefs, to just everybody, and for the staff for being with us during this transition, and for all my board colleagues. You guys are awesome. And thank you so much, darling, for stepping in, and you did a great job. Thank y'all so much. Have a great night.
Dr. Scott.
Just want to say thank you to all of the presentations tonight. I think they were much needed, and thank you for the detailed information so we can move forward and be more productive. I also want to say to the Lonnie B. learners, thank you so much for the work that you shared with us that you guys do at your school. Look forward to visiting. And to my colleagues, happy January Board Appreciation Month. Hopefully we'll celebrate every month and not just in January. Thank you for what you do. Mrs. Gregory, thank you so much for taking on this interim superintendent role. We and I look forward to working with you, learning and growing along with you. So just everyone have a good night. Oh, one thing I forgot. I know to our teachers, I know I was advocating that you get that bonus. I'm still advocating. So hopefully someone will hear me and we'll be able to give you that for your spring break, because I tried to get it when you return after the winter break. So colleagues, hint, hint. Dr. Miley, hint, hint. Mrs. Gregory, you just got here, hint, hint. So hopefully you'll
be able to get that bonus spring break and enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Mrs. Gregory.
Thank you, Ms. Agostini. When I addressed the Richland 2 family on Friday, I talked about focusing on 3 things. 1, improving achievement. 2, being fiscally responsible. 3, continuing to build partnerships with our families, community, and business partners. In other words, keeping the main thing the main thing. We need to make sure that systems are in place and that they're running optimally. I've spent my first week doing status checks and looking forward to working together to move this district forward. And I want to thank you for your support. When I say you, I thank the school board, I thank the staff, and also our wonderful community. So thanks for a great first week.
Thank you, Mrs. Gregory, and I echo and share the sentiments that everyone that has spoken before me share, so I won't repeat what's been stated by my colleagues. But I do want to say a special thank you to Dr. Marshall and Franklin for stepping in those couple of days when we were looking for a leader. As expected, you did outstanding, so thank you so much for stepping in and stepping up. We really appreciate it. To the teachers, administrators, those who were patient with us while we took our time to make the right selection for Richland 2 for an interim superintendent, we thank you too. And I'm just going to leave you all with a letter that I wrote on behalf of the board to share with you the direction that we're going in and just our gratitude. Dear Richland 2 families, I appreciate your patience and understanding as we have worked our way this week through a leadership change at our top administrative position. We, the Richland 2 Board of Trustees, share your commitment and the desire to have a high-performing school district that sets new standards of student achievement. In our selection of interim superintendent Nancy Gregory, we believe we have found a proven leader who brings stability, accountability, and a standard of excellence to the position. Nancy has demonstrated throughout her 40-year plus of service that she is a visionary leader and team builder. At the district office, her leadership responsibilities include being a coordinator of instructional services, executive director of curriculum, instruction and professional development, and chief instructional officer. Mrs. Gregory will lead Richland 2 School District through the end of the 2022-2023 school year. Details on the timeline and process for selecting our new superintendent will be provided in the next few weeks. Right now, this board and district leadership team are laser focused on improving student achievement, student safety, addressing the findings in the IG report, teacher recruitment and retention, and making sure we have SMART goals and accountability built into all we do. It is our unwavering desire to provide the Richland 2 community the very best education available and make sure each student has a pathway to their chosen purpose. I appreciate your continued support. We appreciate your continued support and encourage you to continue to engage in the process to make our schools the very best they can be for all of our students. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
Madam Chair,
Mrs. McFadden.
I move that we adjourn the Tuesday, January 24th, 2023 board meeting.
Is there a second? The motion has been made by Mrs. McFadden and seconded by Dr. Scott. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Can we have a show of hands? All in favor, raise the right hand. All opposed? The motion carries 7-0. Have a great night. The meeting's adjourned.